Hey there, my name's Rod Yates, and you're listening to Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to an artist or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is Robbie of the Avalanches. Late last year, the Avalanches released their third album, We Will Always Love You. It's the follow-up to 2016's Wildflower, which pretty much defined the very notion of a troubled second record. Arriving 16 years after the band's classic debut, Since I Left You, it was a period characterised by false starts, illness, and the departure of band members including Darren Seltman, with whom Robbie co-founded the Avalanches alongside Tony de Blasi in Melbourne in the mid to late 90s. It was also a period in which Robbie relapsed into the alcoholism that almost killed him in his early 20s. But with that all now behind them, Robbie and Tony have returned triumphant with We Will Always Love You. It's a record which merges the Avalanches' sample-based approach to making music with contributions from an incredible list of guest artists. And it's all tied together by a grand concept that focuses on the idea of light and the journey through personal darkness to get there. It also draws inspiration from this fascinating thing called the Voyager Golden Record, which is a project in which astrologer Carl Sagan and writer-producer-director Andrew Yen compiled sounds and images from Earth onto two 12-inch copper phonograph records, which were then sent off into space on the 1977 Voyager spacecraft as a way of communicating our story to extraterrestrials. There is a lot to get through in this interview, and we talk about it all, from the new album to the band's formative days, from the runaway success of Since I Left You to Robbie's battles with addiction and more. Robbie was at home in Melbourne when we caught up, and I started by asking him about the astonishing cast of collaborators on We Will Always Love You. One of the talking points about the record is the incredible collaborators that you have on there. When you think of someone like Johnny Marr from The Smiths, to Leon Bridges, to Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction, through to Cola Boy, to Tricky, to Jamie XX, to Nina Cherry, to Denzel Curry, to Mick Jones from The Clash and Big Audio Dynamite. It's such an incredible list, and that doesn't even cover all of the artists. But
no.
What is even the process of coordinating that? Do you tend to go direct to the artists? Do you go through their people or these previous connections? How does that even work?
It's a mixture. Some people were friends. Some people we go directly to or meet along our musical journeys. You know, like someone like Johnny Marr, for instance. It's like our manager contacted his manager, and we do it that way. So it's a mixture, but it's always like, I mean, we needed to write the record first. So it was like a couple of years of writing, and just the songs need to take shape, and then they lead us towards who might be an appropriate vocalist.
And am I right in thinking that for all the collaborators, you actually sent them an email in advance, just sort of explaining what you were trying to achieve with this album? And if they didn't resonate with that, then perhaps this wasn't the right time to collaborate. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it started as an internal kind of like a series of notes that I was just keeping for myself, really, as ideas were bubbling away and as this album was forming in my head. And then I shared it with Tony and our collaborator Andy, and it was just more for us to just vibe off. And then it was the very first collaborator, Rivers Cuomo, and Tony said, why don't you just send him that email of notes? And even though they were a little personal, I just kind of took a leap of faith, and then it all went from there, and then that became sort of standard practice. We sent those notes out to everyone from then on.
And what sort of things did you touch on in those notes? You mentioned they were quite personal, so presumably you were, I guess, digging quite deep into your experiences?
Yeah, it was just more about where the themes from the record came from, which was personal reflection, really, and you know, growing a little older and thinking about your own mortality and themes like that. That's kind of where it all began. And Tony and I have both had a strange and winding journey through life, both as musicians and personally. So we felt like, you know, sometimes when you're in the middle of, like a dark patch, you can't really, well, for me personally, you can't write about it. You know, you're just getting through. Mm. But, you know, when you come through and you're on the other side, you can reflect and, you know, maybe it's good fuel for writing.
There is very much a sense of the album that there is a light to it, but there's also a case of having to get to that light through various hardships. Is that a unifying theme on the record?
I think so, and it's just not ignoring that the dark side of life, and that's what makes life so beautiful. Though, you know, life is complicated, and it's not black and white. It's often not clear, but if you embrace the full sort of spectrum of our experience and then the beautiful moments become all the more beautiful. And I think that's the music we've always been drawn to. It's like even from when we first were writing Since I Left You, and, we loved that weirder 70s era Brian Wilson stuff. And he could always just hit that midway point between happy and sad. It's kind of like life is so beautiful that it almost breaks your heart.
So where into that whole concept does NASA and the Voyager Golden Record fit in? And can you please explain a little bit about that Golden Record?
I just got back from Japan, actually, and I'd found that beautiful Roaches sample. A friend had played it to me that says, "We will always love you." And that had sort of an everlasting quality to it and seemed to suggest time and also maybe love lingering on after death. And so that became something like of a little sort of touchstone. It was like, oh, we've got something here. And then we came across the story of the Voyager Golden Record and Andrew Druyan and Carl Sagan and how they met and fell in love during the compilation of that Voyager Golden Record. And that all of a sudden became another very strong theme because, we'd been exploring also as sample-based artists, like the notion of when we sample very old singers, like say from the 30s or 40s, it's almost like summoning spirits and their voice is living on through our music. And so we've always been very, very interested in the notion of the human voice living on through recorded music and transmission and all those kind of themes. So when we came across the story of the Voyager Golden Record, it was just like another piece of the puzzle.
And with the Voyager Golden Record, so the idea, if I understand it correctly, was that the Voyager spacecraft was going into space in the late 70s and NASA wanted to include some recordings from Earth in case extraterrestrials found them, and those recordings became the Golden Record. So how did that play out?
Yeah, I think they designed the spacecraft it was going to check out the solar system, but then they were going to let it keep going and it was designed to it's been designed to last for 1 billion years, I think. So, and they did a bunch of research around what medium would last longest in interstellar space, and they came up with the Golden Record. They figured that could last just about 1 billion years. And I think on one side it's got instructions scratched into it about how to play it and how to listen back to it. So they compiled a bunch of music to represent planet Earth, which they took very seriously. And I think there's Chuck Berry on there and whale sounds and lots of different human languages and a baby crying and all different kinds of sounds. And then Anne had the idea of like, well, why don't I get my heart scanned in an ECG and my brainwaves and we'll encode them onto the record as well. So perhaps if a civilization is advanced enough in the future, they can learn about our biology. Because she was thinking like 1 billion years from now, like maybe we'll be no more and this will be the only record left of what we were. So the day she was booked into Bellevue Hospital to have these scans done, Carl proposed to her just out of the blue. And so they'd fallen in love during the making and compiling of this record. And she tells the story of how now the heartbeat of a young woman madly in love is now forever on that disc and will be floating out there for all eternity. And I just thought that was the most beautiful and romantic idea. And like as I mentioned earlier, that we had this idea for an album title, We Will Always Love You, and then you come across a story like that, which is about everlasting love, and all of a sudden it's like we've got something here, So although it began as a very personal exploration of our own mortality and reflecting inwardly on ourselves, we found these other stories that paralleled that, and it's a really lovely stage in the process of making an album when everything starts to click and you're like, this is it. We've got something here. And from then it becomes like this runaway momentum and you kind of you're flying towards the finish line, really.
Yeah, that's great. In terms of working with Sananda Maitreya, the artist formerly known as Terence Trent D'Arby, what was the process like of collaborating with him?
That was absolutely extraordinary, and it continues to be extraordinary. I mean, I sent that initial email to Sananda, but then it didn't end there. It just began a long and winding process of correspondence that continues to this day. And I think I mentioned to you, Rod, before we began recording, like I've got a backlog of like 500 emails after Christmas and New Year I've got to catch up on, and I'm sure like about 100 are from Sananda. So it was this lovely back and forth, and the idea for this song became clearer and clearer and clearer. And it just left me with this overwhelming feeling of gratitude that people can, they're not just dialing in a performance and they're not just doing something in a day, because it's a cool thing to do or whatever. It's like people invested so much of their time and their heart in this project, and it was constantly very, very humbling. Like someone like Sananda, who just put so much of himself into it, and took our initial themes and ideas and then retold them from his own personal perspective. It's just an incredible experience.
And why Sananda?
Well, we were just stuck with that song and we just could not think of the right voice. And then all of a sudden, and sometimes we will sit with the song for months and months and months. It's not about getting a name collaborator or a well-known guest or anything. It's like finding a sample and someone whose tone and the timbre of their voice will fit with the song. And we knew that was a beautiful piece of music, but we just could never get there. And I think it might have been Tony one day who suggested it. And then the process begins of like, well, I wonder if he's ever heard of us. I wonder how we would get in touch. And and then maybe a few weeks later you get an email back and it's like, yeah, he knows you guys and he'd love to do something and here's his email, reach out, and and then it goes from there.
And what about your experiences with Perry Farrell as well? Because I understand Jane's Addiction were an act that you and Tony in particular were fans of growing up.
Well, yeah, I mean, me and Tony have been in bands together ever since we were in high school, just playing covers bands and learning to play the guitar and stuff like that. And Tony used to sing and we loved Jane's Addiction. And I still remember our first share house we had together, we would be getting stoned together and listening to Jane's Addiction. And I think I had an old VHS copy of that movie they made, The Gift,
right.
That strange old movie they made. And once again, we reached out. Oh, we were in LA actually, and then Perry invited us over to his place, and that's where he has his studio at his home in Santa Monica. So we cruised over there, and it was such a wonderful day. He welcomed us into his home, and Eddie, his wife, was there, and his kids, and the dogs are everywhere, and we were just sitting around eating and talking, and Perry would walk around the house barefoot, sort of singing ideas for this groove we had, and Tony and I were just sitting there looking at each other and going like, remember when we were kids and we used to listen to this guy? That's that voice. But such a warm guy and so open-hearted. I got a message from him a couple of days ago actually, because he put out a retrospective box set just recently, and that song also that we did together also appears on that. So,
right.
Yeah, it was a real thrill.
Nice. And the last collaborator I wanted to ask you about was Mick Jones from initially The Clash, but then Big Audio Dynamite. And I understand that Big Audio Dynamite were actually a really pivotal band for you in terms of inspiring your interest in sampling. And then obviously Mick is now on We Will Always Love You.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And is there a part of you that just takes a second while it's all happening to go, this, like, wow, how did it come to this?
Exactly. Like I remember when I think Tony and I had been DJing in Sydney, and we woke up with only a couple of hours sleep, and I checked my emails and there was a Mick Jones vocal just sort of sitting in my inbox, and it was kind of like is this really happening? And yeah, I mean obviously the Clash are iconic and we're huge fans, but Big Audio Dynamite had, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but certainly in Australia had a couple of hits on the radio when I was in high school. And I was just fascinated by that sound. It was like someone, tuning the radio midway through a song. And I just could not stop listening to it. I was like, how do they make this music? Like I didn't understand it, but I knew it was kind of different, and there was some kind of collage thing going on. And I think as someone who'd been just incredibly passionate about music their whole life, knew that's what I wanted to do with my life, but could play a bunch of instruments, but only very badly. A little light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, "This might be the way for me." I mean, it wasn't just Big Audio Dynamite. We were listening to De La Soul and The Far Side, and some early David Byrne and Brian Eno stuff, and a bunch of different stuff. But that was certainly a pivotal moment for sure.
Yeah, and did you have much back and forth with Mick?
No, he's a bit elusive, Mick. He actually, when we were finishing off the We Go On, we would send the song to his manager, and she would go over to his place and play it to him off her laptop, and he'd give her feedback, and then she'd come home and email us and with his notes and stuff. So, yeah, I don't know if he's even on email.
Okay, fair enough. And you mentioned that you had this passion for music. When's your first, I guess, the first conscious moment you think of having that passion?
I think it was like, I just remember being fascinated by my father's record collection, and I can still picture the room that my childhood home and sitting cross-legged on the floor and studying these record sleeves and reading all about the different producers and playing record after record and being told off if I was scratching them and that kind of thing. Yeah, so I think I was just fascinated from the very beginning.
And what records were they?
He had like a folk music collection, so there was the band and Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Neil Young, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, and is this in Maryborough? Is that correct?
That was in Melbourne. I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne.
Okay,
and then we moved to country Victoria when I was like in high school.
Right, and so that's when you moved to Maryborough, which has got maybe 7,000 or 8,000 people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. So
what was that like then, moving to a country town away from the big city when you're a teenager? Because normally when you reach those teen years, that's when you, I suppose, crave perhaps the city and all of its attractions. What did it mean for you moving to a more of a country area?
That's right. Well, I think I resisted it and I didn't want to move. And I was like, I was just sort of like hitting that 13, 14-year-old, that thing where I was like, I was a city kid. I knew what I wanted to do, and it just seemed boring to me. It's like I was at that bratty age where I didn't appreciate the beauty of the countryside and nature and what an experience it could be. I was just kind of rebellious and was like, this sucks. This is boring.
And how did that manifest? How did that play out?
It was just, I just got lost in music. And speaking of Johnny Marr, like I remember I would walk like 5 kilometres or whatever into town, and there'd be one little store that would get the NME in every week, and they'd be, obviously they were coming over on the ship back then or whatever, so there was like a 3-month-old copy of the NME, and this is like way before the internet. And I would read about all these British bands like the Smiths, and then a bit later, like the Stone Roses and stuff like that, and it just seemed like this faraway land that I would never get to, but just that was so passionate about music. And I was just like, one day I've got to go, one day that's where I'm going to go, and this is what I'm going to do with my life.
But it must have been in a country town. It must have seemed almost like an impossible dream.
Like an impossible dream. And like, it was also like I mentioned, pre-internet. So unless I would go into the city and buy some of these records, it was just my imagination as to like what they even would sound like, So, and, the NME had such colourful writing back then, and I remember often being disappointed when I heard the actual records. I was like, goodness, the review was so much better than in my head than what the album actually sounded like.
But do you think there's a benefit to that in terms of your creativity and how you've developed as a creative person? The fact that you weren't in the city where there would have been all ages gigs every weekend. You pretty much had to, as you said, live in your imagination and imagine what these bands would sound like. Do you think that played a role in shaping the artist you became?
For sure. And I think definitely in terms of like having to find your own way and make your own little musical universe, that I can see now that's where it all began. And I got a little 4-track recorder and began experimenting, like making tape loops and recording little sections of sound and making little basic sound collages. And it all kind of began from there. And then as soon as high school finished, Tony and I split back to the city and started our first band, and our high school friend Joe was dating this guy Darren, who moved into our already crowded little flat, and we began making music together. But I think the key was from the very beginning we knew that like we just wanted to find our own little place in the musical universe that wasn't already occupied. And then it was like we'd be in competition with nobody, and we could find our way and develop a sound of our own, like as opposed to say hearing like an early Chemical Brothers record where the drums are so amazing and so well made. And it's like I remember when I first began sampling, I would try to make tunes like that. And as you learn more, you realize, oh my God, it's such an art form. Like this might take me 10 years just to get as good as making drums as like Tom and Ed from the Chemical Brothers. And it was like, let's not do that. Let's go sideways and find a little place where nobody's operating and create our own identity. So that's what we did. We kind of used samples, but in a Phil Spector way, in a Beach Boys way, in a My Bloody Valentine way, in an FM pop way. So, we didn't care about the bottom end or the bass. It was more about conveying emotion and conveying feeling, and that's sort of how our journey began.
I mean, it took a while to get there, didn't it? Because as you mentioned, you moved to Melbourne and you started a band called Alarm 115 or Alarm 115 with Tony and Darren, and that was very much a punk band. So I guess in those early days, you were, I suppose, just finding your way, were you? It was just enough to have instruments and to play?
Yeah, it was all just like, I mean, we were just punk kids, so it was just like whatever we could get in a junk store. So they were junk store guitars. Sometimes they only had 2 or 3 strings on them. And it was just sort of, we were also listening to like bands like Ultra Bit A and Drive Like Jehu and underground American punk records. So, we were just very into noise music as well at the same time. And in these same junk stores where we were buying these guitars, we started buying old records. And I remember before we had a sampler, we would we were always just like up all night getting really drunk and dripping wax from the candle onto a record so it would skip and loop in a certain place and begin to make a rhythm, and then we would play along to it on the guitars. So.
Wow. Very primitive but effective.
Primitive, yeah.
And before, one of the stories I love about you guys is before you morphed, before Alarm, is it Alarm 115 or Alarm 115?
I've got no idea.
Okay. Before that band morphed into the Avalanches, you went through a phase of playing shows with a different name at every gig. And one of those names was the Swinging Monkey Cocks, which was very creative. What was the idea behind changing the names, and what were some of those names?
We probably knew in our hearts that we had potential, but we were kind of also so shy and embarrassed of where we currently were, which was just a shambles, that we were kind of like, we didn't want to give it a name or anything at that stage. And but we kind of thought we can't stay playing, just rehearsing together in our flat forever. Like, we need to like play in front of people at some point. But I guess it was like a way of not taking it too seriously. We would just book a room in a small pub, not tell anyone. Maybe some of our friends would find out, but there'd be like 5 or 10 or 15 people there, and we would always have a different name. So as almost because we were a bit embarrassed of where we were at, I think.
Right.
And then by the 5th show, we were called the Avalanches, and word had got out that I think our demo tape had been passed around, and all of a sudden all these music industry people turned up, and it was full. This little room was full, and we were called the Avalanches that night. And we weren't ready, but ever since then, there's kind of been no turning back whether we were ready or not. It was just kind of, to pardon the pun, it snowballed from there.
but how did that happen? Like, how do you mentioned you had a demo tape, and all of a sudden record label people turn up? Like, that doesn't happen to every band.
No, I don't know. Like, we'd been making this demo tape because I was at doing a film course at uni, and I kind of wasn't really turning up, and I wasn't a very good student. But they had the studio there for doing the soundtracks for films, and of course every other student wanted to be a film director. So they were all just off making films, and they kind of just let me have this soundtrack studio all to myself, and I think they kind of knew that's where my head was at. And so there was no one was teaching me how to use it, but I just was given free access to it. I could go in there all day and night, and I just learned how to use all the gear myself. And then Darren and Tony would come in as well, and we ended up with this little demo tape. We started sending it around. We sent one to Steve Pav, the Australian promoter, who booked us to support. I think it was John Spencer Blues Explosion or something. And then word about that support gig got out. This tape had been passed around, and then all of a sudden, at the 5th show, it was just packed with record company people, and it was kind of like overwhelming and a bit embarrassing, to be honest. Like, we didn't feel ready, and certainly live it didn't sound like I imagined in my head. Like, we'd had a bit of time to make this demo tape, and that had some good moments, but live were a bit of a shambles. And I think we just overcompensated by just smashing instruments and acting like we didn't give a fuck,
Right. And this is it's perhaps a little more Beastie Boys-esque than the band that you morphed into?
Yeah, like, it was all samples at the core, and then we were playing samples, weird old organs we found in junk shops. There was like a drum kit, and then Darren would kind of do this weird rappy, yelpy thing, like a cross between the Beastie Boys and like maybe Marquis Smith from The Fall, who we really loved. It was kind of this ranting vocal thing he would do over the top, and that's what we did for the first couple of years.
After the break, Robbie talks about the Avalanches' early gigs, his memories of creating Since I Left You, and overcoming his battles with alcohol. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Robbie Chater of the Avalanches. And is it true that you would turn up particularly in the early days when you'd have samplers with you and stuff, you turn up to shows and the road crew or whoever was doing that sound that night would just be like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, I remember, especially at festivals, and there's be a very, very quick changeover, maybe only 20 minutes. And we were like, no, we can't, we've got to plug in the sample and load all these old floppy disks. And I remember the S900 Akai sampler we had back then could only hold sort of one song per floppy disk. So we would I would be madly like loading that song. It would take 3 minutes to load. I don't know if you can remember the sound of like an old floppy disk when it's loading. It's kind of going, and then so one of the guys would kind of be like having to like entertain the audience in some way, like telling a joke or ranting on with some weird story while the floppy disk loaded. Then we could play a song. Then we'd have to stop while I loaded the next one. Or like Darren was quite a good drummer actually, so he would hop on the drum kit and maybe just do a drum solo or keep the beat going, right. And then we'd kick into the next song. It was a mess. It was a mess. And then the road crew. What Australia was like then, Rod. It was very, very rock culture, an amazing rock culture, but they weren't used to samplers and keyboards and things like that. And I remember lugging this old organ onto these festival stages, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't, and they were just shaking out their heads. And I remember one time we supported the Sneaker Pimps. Remember the Sneaker Pimps? British band. Yeah. We played with them in Sydney, and their crew were just shaking their heads, and they were like, what is this, a fucking bargain basement in here? Like, what are you guys doing? Like,
so in 1997 comes around and you release El Producto, and then 2000, of course, Since I Left You, which was the album that put you on the map globally and changed your life. I mean, when you think back to the creation of that album, what do you think of?
God, it was just such a happy time. It really was. I remember like working on it day and night, hardly sleeping. I was in a little share house. I had a tiny bedroom that could barely fit my desk and the computer. But it was just, we just believed in what we were doing. It was just for us. It was just for us. We were filled with the joy of music. We're only maybe 3 or 4 years down this path of sampling, and like we spoke about, we'd done some of the early shows with our vocals over the top. And then when it came time to start making Since I Left You, we took it a step further and we thought, let's remove all traces of ourselves, like no vocals, no instruments. We will just make it entirely from samples as if it's beamed in from another galaxy or another universe or something. And it was great because although we moved all physical traces of ourselves, like our voices and stuff, it was filled with our hearts, And I remember as it grew, this feeling of excitement grew of like, this is really cool. Like these are pop songs, and we felt like we'd found our own thing, And I remember when I'd finished making the song Since I Left You, it felt like, God, this song has an intro, a verse, a chorus, a bridge, and I remember this beautiful feeling of like, I've done it. I've written a pop song just from samples, and it felt really special.
Is it true that you were perhaps at first a little embarrassed to show that to the rest of the guys, though, that song?
I was, but I think sleep deprivation comes into it. Like I was a shy kid anyway, and then I remember I'd been up all night working on it. It was like probably 3 days into it. Like I used to get on these rolls of inspiration and be afraid to stop in case I forgot where it was going, And Since I Left You was like that. And when the vocal sample first connected, and I remember pitching her voice up a bit, and I loved the Jackson 5, and to me it sounded a bit like a young Michael Jackson, or that's what I was going for. And then I remember as dawn was breaking and I'd been up all night, then I was kind of a bit sleep deprived, and I started to get a bit paranoid, and I was like, oh my God, does this just sound like a really bad shampoo commercial or something? Like, Since I Left You, I found the word so new. Then I grabbed a few hours sleep, and the guys were going to play basketball, and they swung by my house to grab me, and I was like, should I play it to them? I don't know. Like, I kind of was a bit embarrassed about it. And then I played it, and I was like, man, this is great. This has got to be the first song on the album. Because I was like, maybe we could put it at the end of the album. I was really kind of bashful. And they were like, no, this has got to be the first song, and we should call the album that. And this is fantastic.
And you were, about 22, 23 when all this was happening?
Yeah.
Okay. Oddly enough, the moment that I realised how far and wide that album had connected was many years after it came out. I was interviewing Bob Mould from Husker Du and Sugar and obviously his solo work, and he listed that album as one of his favourite albums of all time. And for some reason, that was the moment that just clicked with me, how far that album had resonated. What for you opened your eyes as to how big that album had become?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, certainly, like, after it came out, we did a bunch of touring and we would go to England and, like, the Face wanted to interview. Actually, the Face flew out to Australia to interview us, and that was kind of weird.
Wow.
And then we'd do a bunch of press. And I remember, like, we had to fly to Germany or something for the MTV Europe Awards, and I think like Pink gave us some award or something. We're in this huge stadium in Germany, like making an acceptance speech, and I was just like the shy kid. I was just like, this is all too much,
Yeah.
But after all the touring and all the mayhem that followed that album, we came back to Melbourne, and still kind of like pre-internet, pre-YouTube, and it just kind of felt like it was all over. Like it had been a beautiful album, but very quickly the world seemed to move on. And I remember it was like 2004 or 5, and my then girlfriend at the time said to me, "Oh, people kind of think that album's a bit of a classic, and it's like it's something that people remember." And I was like, "Really? What do you mean?" And that was the first time someone had spoken about it to me in that way. I never thought about it in that way. I thought of it as like this beautiful thing we'd made for ourselves that had somehow connected with people. But then, okay, well, now I need to make another one and see where I go from here. And then, of course, the longer we took to follow it up, it's almost like the more the myth around Since I Left You grew.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were a shy kid. So how did you cope then with the increased attention?
I was lucky. Like, Darren was a very big personality, very charismatic guy. Tony was a very funny guy. Like, I had my friends around me who could carry that load, and that was sort of very generous of them. And I think they recognised too that, like, I struggled with that stuff. But I'd had I was very shy during my teens. I'd kind of always struggled socially, and I think I'd just always had a very like low self-esteem. So in my teens, I coped with that through drinking, and I had a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol from a very young age. And it had got so bad by the time I was like 20. I was like ended up in intensive care, and I nearly sort of didn't make it through. And so Since I Left You came after that, when all of that was behind me, and I was so full of life and so happy to be alive and have this sort of nightmare period of drinking behind me, that Since I Left You just kind of came pouring out in all this joy. And then ever since then, it's been a journey of, how to live life without anaesthetising myself, basically. And, yeah.
And how do you do that?
I meditate a lot. I run, and I just basically I just work on my thinking and work on myself. It's just been a journey of realizing, I don't know, of internal exploration, and realizing that we all have this kind of ego, this head that will chatter away with constant chatter, and a lot of it isn't helpful. Well, for me, not anyway. And now it's fantastic. Like, if my head will throw up some moments of self-doubt or fear, I can just recognize them as, well, that's just my thinking. That's not necessarily the truth.
Yeah. And
I can tap back into the bigger, broader picture of life, and realize that, and just practice gratitude and realize how lucky I am.
And you mentioned, I guess, your issues with alcohol in your late teens, and I think from about the age of 15 is when you started to have issues with alcohol. Was that something that, had there been a history of that in your family, or was this something that was new to you?
It was new to me, definitely. I mean, I guess all families would say, look, there's perhaps someone with those. I mean, it's incredibly common,
sure,
in our society. But yeah, it was my journey, and I've been very lucky. Actually, my family have been so wonderful and so supportive.
And when you mentioned that you moved to the country town, or you moved to a country area in your teens, that was one thing that did occur to me, actually, whether alcohol was also a way to alleviate boredom. Was there any truth to that?
I don't think it was so much boredom, but I think it was more like an uncomfortability in myself, like a deep, deep uncomfortability and restlessness. And then as soon as I discovered alcohol, probably like 14 or something, it was like that. It took that feeling away, Right. So it was never a healthy, like, social relationship with alcohol that I had. I was always, from the very beginning, I was always drinking to, like, fix something in myself that I didn't like.
Yeah.
But of course I didn't know that at the time. That's only in retrospect that I can recognize that.
Sure.
But and any time that I've returned to drinking since then, it's been to kind of make myself feel better. And I've just had to learn that doesn't work. Like in the moment, yeah, sure, anesthetizing yourself may feel better in that moment, but it's no way to live,
Yeah.
and you need to find another way to function in the world.
Sure. Yeah. And you mentioned those times that you returned to alcohol. I'm aware that I think for your then partner's 30th, you had a glass of wine and then I guess spiraled after that and went back to using alcohol to anesthetize yourself. And you've referred to the second half of your 30s as a black hole. In what way?
I guess I hadn't drank for like 12 years since it had nearly killed me, when I was 20. And a couple of glasses of red wine and after like 12 years. And then within a week I was really, really bad again, drinking extremely heavily, and it had just gripped me again. And I guess I'd never had that experience of a break and then going back to it, so I didn't know what I was in for. And it took me 5 years to stop again. And that was just a really, really dark period for me. I lost my home, I lost my partner, I lost my physical health. In any key life area that you may look at it kind of destroyed. I couldn't make music, I couldn't function. And so I guess, just to be perfectly candid, that is the journey that I began reflecting on when we began making We Will Always Love You.
Right, okay. I mean, how much, if you don't mind me asking, as a 20, 21-year-old, how much do you have to drink for it to almost kill you?
Well, I mean, I was just in a rat. For me, it just, I built up really high tolerance, and I'm drinking around the clock. So whenever I'm awake, I would be drinking, but often people wouldn't know because, I could still function. My body just got used to, got so used to it, I would need to drink more and more to feel the effect, So I always end up in the same place, which is just drinking spirits or vodka. And then I didn't know when I was 20 that how dangerous it is to just stop suddenly, and that you can go into withdrawals and you can seizure. And that's what happened to me when I was 20. It was a withdrawal seizure. And I think I was in intensive care for a month, and then I was in psych ward after that. And it took me a long time to recover, actually.
And we spoke earlier about We Will Always Love You being, I guess, something of a journey into the light, out of darkness, and that resonates with what you were just saying then. But you've also spoken about Denzel Curry's contribution on the song Take Care and You're Dreaming, and how his story resonated with you as well. And his lyrics are so open in that song, where he's talking about suicidal thoughts and the passing of his sister and his brother. And are they the reasons that his lyrics really resonated with you?
Yeah, I mean, we just had a feeling, because he'd been so open to the collaboration, that it could work. And I just briefly recounted my story and my journey to him in the morning at the beginning of the session. And it was only a few weeks later, really, as I was editing and mixing his vocals, that it really hit home that how deeply he'd allowed himself to be so vulnerable, and he'd really opened up in that moment in the studio in front of strangers and told his own version of that story, of a journey from darkness to light. And it's really incredible, because I know, when I was his age, I wasn't capable of being so open and so vulnerable, or I didn't even have that amount of self-awareness. It's only been as I've got older that I've been able to reflect on my journey. So for him to be able to do it in the moment like that, in another country, in a studio in front of strangers, and to be able to have that beautiful bird's eye view of his own story at such a young age, I just think that's incredible.
So 2016 rolls around, and Wildflower, the second album, the follow-up to Since I Left You, finally comes out. And when you listen to that album, can you disassociate the record from the period of making it? Because there was a lot that happened in that 16 years. So your record label collapsed. You had members left, including Darren, who was obviously so pivotal in the early days. You've spoken about maxing out credit card after credit card to get the thing made, and you also had issues with autoimmune diseases and obviously the struggle with alcoholism and the fears the album would never be finished. I mean, there was a lot going on in that 16 years. Can you listen to the album on its own merits, or will it forever be tainted, do you think, by all that stuff?
I can't yet. But I know that day will come, because I know with Since I Left You, that day came. Like, do you know Tim Burgess of the Charlatans?
Yes.
Does these great Twitter listening parties, and he reached out to us to do one about Since I Left You, and we did it last year. So that's like 19 years after it came out, and everybody on Twitter, like who's interested, presses play at the same time wherever they are around the world, and they listen to the album, and then the artist tweets out notes and memories of making it. So we agreed to do that, and that was 19 years after Since I Left You was made, and I had that experience of hearing it almost for the first time. It had been long enough where I just enjoyed it like a listener, and it was wonderful. So I'm sure that day will come with Wildflower, but it hasn't come yet.
So it took you 19 years to appreciate Since I Left You, an album which
Pretty much. Well, because I'm always just hearing, you know, what I could have done better, or is that sample a bit out of tune, or what, you know, like it's like, you know what perfectionists are like, you know. So it takes time to be able to hear it again, just as a listener.
Throughout that time, that period of making that record, did you ever fall out of love with making music?
Wildflower?
Yes.
No, but it definitely needed breaks. I mean, there were definitely periods where I just could not make music, that's for sure. But I put it this way, I never fell out of love with music. But yeah, with making music, possibly.
What kept you going throughout all those things you had to deal with?
I think it was the friendship that Tony and I have. That's what kept us going. And, you know, just our ability to laugh and take things lightly, and when things felt too serious, you know, be able to let it all go and just bring it back to our friendship and the joy of making music. You know, I think that's what kept us going, and also personal evolution and being able to get to that point of like seeing things in perspective. I think. Yeah.
Okay. Not long after finishing that album, if I understand correctly, I believe you got rid of your entire record collection, which was around 7,000 records.
Yeah.
Which for someone who's a record collector just makes my heart stop. Did you ever regret it? Or have you ever regretted it?
Once or twice I've had pangs of nostalgia about all those records, but no, I haven't. I like kind of making like dramatic fresh starts. You know, it was a wonderful experience because as you know, like the journey of making Wildflower had been long and heavy, and so it wasn't just my records, it was like all my possessions. You know, I was like, I just want a fresh start. I just want to live out of a suitcase for a while. I want to travel the world, see the world, just make music on my laptop. I don't want to be carting records around. You know, it was just like a feeling of being light and anything is possible and a new beginning. So that was part of that. And also like, you know, like I believe that you need to get rid of the old to make room for the new. And since then I've found it's been a real joy discovering new albums and buying records again, you know. So that's been lovely.
So what did you, when you reflect on the time period that it took to make Wildflower compared to with just the 3 or 4 years that it took to make We Will Always Love You, what do you think you learned about creativity during that 16-year period that you were able to apply to We Will Always Love You?
I learned so much, and that's been a real gift actually. You know, making Since I Left You, I didn't have the hugest record collection. You know, they were just junk store records. I mean, there were a lot of them, but they were all just $2 records. You know, that album wasn't made out of like super rare collectible stuff. You know, it was just flotsam and jetsam from around the world that had found its way to Australia's junk stores. And so that album was very much made in the moment. It was grabbing one record in the morning and that sense of discovery and hearing weird, strange little moments and going, I'm going to make a song today just from this one record. You know, and then you'd save it on a floppy disk, and that was that. And that's, you know, and I remember reflecting on making Since I Left You, and it's got 18 songs on it. We only made 18 songs. Maybe we made 19, and then the record was done, you know. So it wasn't like millions of versions of things. It was like you make it and that's that. And then with Wildflower, you know, technology had progressed. You could save endless versions of songs. We made thousands of bits of music and we just kind of got lost. And it was a wonderful learning curve about my own creativity. You know, I remember thinking when I began making Wildflower, this is a very naive mistake. I remember thinking, well, I didn't even really try when I was making Since I Left You. So if I really try really hard, it would be like 10 times better. And it was a really hard lesson to learn, a wonderful lesson to learn that it's got nothing to do with effort and it's got nothing to do with the amount of hours you put in. Although, you know, to to refine and perfect your craft. You need to put the time in, but it's about inspiration. It's about being in the moment. It's about the joy and discovery of music, and it's about not overthinking it. And it's about capturing the moment that happens right there and then when you're in a certain mood and you hear a certain moment in a certain old record and you make a song that day, And so making Wildflower, that's the reason I got rid of my record collection, because it's like I didn't want to drag along these thousands of records from the past. I didn't want to drag along all these old half unfinished songs from making Wildflower. We got rid of all that stuff, got rid of all those records, got rid of all those hard drives, and it was just back to like making a song each day and making a song in the moment. And I think that's why We Will Always Love You came along so quickly. It probably took the same amount of time to make as Since I Left You took to make.
Right, okay. And you've spoken about floppy disks and particularly that technology early on. What was the, I suppose, the biggest occasion that you were playing where that technology failed you, particularly in the early days?
Well, I remember after we made Since I Left You, all of a sudden we were playing like big slots at festivals in England. And we were still I was still loading a sampler by hand. I was loading it off a zip drive at that point, but it was still nerve-wracking. And if the power went out, you'd have to stop and load the whole thing again, So It was like I remember half of our English road crew at the time, their job was just to make sure, the power wouldn't go out and nobody standing at the side of the stage would pick out the power cord and stuff. I remember we were playing like one of the V festivals or something in England. There was kind of a really big festival and we were given a really late slot because Since I Left You was doing so well. I remember looking to the side of the stage and there was all these celebrities had come to check us out, and there was like Kylie Minogue was there and a bunch of other people. And of course the sampler went down and it was just like silent. It was just like, the whole set stopped and we just had to stop and like kind of reset and start again. And then we got the show going again. And I remember glancing over to the side stage and Kylie was gone. Everybody cleared out. I was like, oh, we've blown it.
That's a good lesson in how fickle the music business can be.
That's right. Actually, Fatboy Slim was still there, and afterwards he was like, "That was amazing. That was a riot." And so I was like, "Yeah, Norman gets it.
Nice.
He gets yeah."
And look, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people that you would give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, I wouldn't know where to begin. I mean, my family have just been so amazing, especially with my struggles with addiction. My partner is absolutely incredible. I think the most beautiful part of the whole journey is my friendship with Tony. And, I wouldn't even be alive today without Tony. I think I should give a very special mention to Andy Sekeris, who Tony and I wrote We Will Always Love You with. And that was a lovely burst of fresh air. After making two very sample-heavy records, it was lovely to work with a real musician, a great musician, and mix things up a bit. And so Andy was definitely a beautiful energy to be around while we were writing this record. Definitely our record label, John O'Donnell and everybody at EMI has been absolutely fantastic. I'm sure with the amount of samples involved, they probably don't make a killing financially on an Avalanches record. Like, I don't know, but I get the sense that they're doing it very much for the love of it as well, and we understand that. And putting out one of our records isn't easy. I mean, the paperwork involved for those guys. I mean, they called We Will Always Love You Admin Palooza. Like, it was just a team of 20 people clearing samples non-stop. We're incredibly fortunate, and everybody that we collaborate with, seems to put in so much time and effort. And look, don't get me started. There'd be so many people that have helped us along the way.
Just lastly, you mentioned Tony several times. Obviously, incredibly important to the Avalanches and to you personally. Was your bond formed early on?
Yeah, it was. It was. And I think when you go through so many ups and downs with someone, it gets stronger and stronger. I mean, Tony's like family to me. I mean, my family think of Tony as part of the family, and we talk, reflect on our friendship a lot, but musically too, it's just a wonderful relationship. Like, we both just intuitively know what each other's thinking. We know if something is even appropriate for an Avalanches record, And there's just this unspoken thing that we'd never really been able to find in anyone else until we met Andy recently. But,
Well, Well, look, Robbie, thank you so much for your time, mate. Thank you for sharing your story and for joining me. It's been great to chat with you.
Thank you, Rod. It's been wonderful.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. Big thanks to Robbie for his time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.